welcome to this session around imposter syndrome. Um, so, as some of you may already know, my name is Darren Shaw, and I have been an imposter. Yes, I would classify myself as a king of imposter. I didn't know of this thing called imposter syndrome until I went onto this lovely app called Clubhouse. That's when I heard that it was a syndrome, and I thought, oh, I thought it was just a necessary part of life sometimes, and things that you just need to handle. But if somebody had told me that it was a syndrome, I might have accepted that and been afraid of myself, scared of my own shadow, as it were. When I say I've been an imposter, I mean I've walked into music scenes where I'm a nobody and everybody else is a somebody. And I know that I'm the odd one out because I've not been around for years and I'm not somebody who belongs and I'm not somebody who helped to set up the scene. So technically I'm an imposter. So I had to adopt a whole set of beliefs to walk into it and make myself a part of the scene without the people's choice. I remember going to university and realizing that I was the only like a Jamaican-y person in my psychology degree. And when I did my counseling and psychotherapy studies, I was the only man in the room and the only black man in the room. And I was like, oh my God. And again, I realized that maybe am I supposed to be an imposter? But again, I didn't know it was a syndrome. I wish somebody had told me, then I would have known to feel anxious about it. Now, we all have our own experiences in life of stepping into situations where we're the odd one out, where we become the imposter. And again, if somebody doesn't tell you to get anxious about it, then you don't really see it as a syndrome. You just see it as you're the odd one out and you're just going to do whatever you need to do in the context. But I want to go deeper into imposter syndrome, into the things that I think are most important. Now, it's a huge area, which started in around about the late 1970s, and stuff. And obviously, we talk about this today, generically in the context of sort of academic genericness. And then we're going to talk about some of the NLP tactics and techniques that one would use to help somebody who has imposter syndrome. Imposter syndrome. And we're going to talk about this from a sort of NLP perspective. So definitions. An imposter. An imposter is a fraud, a faker. And it comes from the old French, which is obviously based on Latin. It comes from the old French impute. It means to deceive. To deceive. So somebody who deceives. And syndrome comes from sun, which means run, and dramin, which means together in ancient Greek. So syndrome is a group of symptoms which seem to constantly happen together. And because this group of symptoms constantly happens together, we call a thing a syndrome. What's AIDS? Acquired immunodeficiency syndrome. So AIDS isn't even a thing. It's a bunch of symptoms which points to a thing. So we call it a thing and we just refer to it as AIDS. But it's just a bunch of symptoms which run together. You know, Down syndrome. Down syndrome is another one of those things. It's a whole bunch of symptoms which definitely happen together, which seem to point to a thing. You got the oh God, schizophrenia has been recently redefined. I say recently, within the last 8-9 years, schizophrenia has been redefined as a syndrome. There's a whole bunch of symptoms which seem to constantly occur and run together. Now, this is important to understand in the context of imposter syndrome, because imposter syndrome is a whole bunch of symptoms which seem to run together. Based on lots of studies done in the literature and that. And what I find this useful to help with is the understanding of it's a bunch of symptoms that run together, which means that it's not really it's not a thing. It's not an actual disease that one can pinpoint. It's just a bunch of symptoms which definitely run together. But is it useful to look at it as a specific thing, a noun, imposter syndrome, or is it more useful to look at it as a bunch of symptoms which can be looked at individually and dealt with individually? I'll leave that question for your mind to consider. So Here's some definitions. You can read the words on the screen yourself, or I'll read them out aloud. It's a psychological phenomenon characterized by feelings of inadequacy, self-doubt, persistent fear of being exposed, people finding you out. Even though there's lots of evidence to suggest that you deserve to be wherever it is you are. Even though there's evidence like maybe you've got degrees or doctorates or masters or qualifications or experience or knowledge or whatever, you still feel like a fake. You still feel like you're faking it. You still feel like a fraud, so on and so forth. And again, as you can see here on the screen, people that have imposter syndrome, they say, oh, I'm only successful because of luck, or I'm only successful because of somebody else. I'm only successful because of timing. Never, ever anything to do with their own abilities. Never anything to do with their own abilities. And it is constant anxiety around people finding them out. Constant anxiety. People are going to find me out and I'm going to get kicked out of whatever the thing is. And as you can see, the imposter syndrome can affect all of the different areas of your life. So where this began. So in the 1970s, a bunch of people, Clance and Imes, they mainly did a study of lots and lots of women, 150 women, with various different ranges of types of degrees, from masters up to PhDs. These were all people that were very, very respected professionals, and they were outstanding in what they did. But despite their achievement, Clance and Imes found in this this main study, I think it was 1978, they did a lot of their conclusions. They found in their study that all these women felt like they were frauds. And at this point in time, it was called imposter's phenomenon. Imposter's phenomenon. So they didn't call it syndrome yet. Later on, I don't know who attributed the word syndrome. I couldn't be bothered to find out. So this mainly came from studying women in throughout professional fields, and they found all these common things like you see on screen: doubting their intelligence, believing that they've fooled everyone, that they've deceived everyone. And many of these women, a crazy amount of these women, were saying, "Oh, it's only luck that I'm here." Somebody must have made a mistake. Apparently, a lot of people said somebody must have made a mistake on the application form when they looked at my application. And this was a constant thing. Again, and this was maybe of its time. It was in 1978. The main studies I read were 1978 and 1979, because I was looking for the origin of this stuff when I first looked at this years ago. So I think it's important to note that this originally came from the study of women. I thought that was fascinating, very, very fascinating. After I've read a lot of studies, but I didn't want to pack it into lots of slides of study after study after study. After reading that there's lots and lots of studies that are mainly centered around women, I then found the next biggest area that these studies were done around was of Black people in the United States. Okay, lots and lots of African-American people. I apologize if this causes any offense, the term, but lots of Black African-American people in the United States were then studied, and the imposter phenomenon was found there heavily. So there was a heavy amount of research into that. And then I've read lots of research that was about Black African-American women. That's a heavily researched area. So what I've found heavily is that Black African-American women seem to be the most, where you'll find the most amount of imposter phenomenon. And again, this is in the States, so there's a huge bias because a lot of the research is done in the States. But there are some more generalized conclusion that we can draw from these things, and we're going to go a little bit more into that in a moment. And like I said, we're going to touch on a couple of sensitive topics because this whole subject arose out of looking at things like gender and race and these things. I just want to bring up this subject. So this is a subject that comes from the field of sociology or social psychology. In-group versus out-group. So there is these terms in sociology or social psychology are terms which are used in those areas. In-group is the group of people that are in with each other. They hang out with each other, they are similar to each other, and they are the people that feel like they are the main members of a group. Out-group is everybody else, the outside, the outsiders. Okay, so in-group, us, out-group, them. So it's an us versus them mentality. In-group versus out-group. Very, very important to understand this thing. I think it's very, very important in the context of imposter syndrome, because sometimes imposter syndrome will arise, not always just this factor here, but sometimes imposter syndrome will arise because internally you believe that you are a member of the out group, and you see or hear people, other people who, from your perspective, seem to be members of the in group. And on the inside, you think to yourself, well, I cannot be, or I am not a member of the in group. Therefore, I'm an imposter. And you might say, well, it's not an imposter syndrome. It's just I'm a member of the out group and they're not going to accept me and I'm not one of them. Therefore, sometimes that will then make you more susceptible to anxieties around navigating yourself around the people who are the in group. Or it might make you try harder, or it might make you anxious, or it might make you have issues or thoughts or negative beliefs, or it might help hurt you on an emotional level, and make it that every time you leave what you perceive to be in group and you go home to your friends and family, it's like you have to let go of all of that energy because you've been around what you perceive to be the in group and you don't perceive yourself to be one of them, and you perceive yourself to be an imposter or a person who's broken in, but you're a member of the out group. And this is one of the things that will contribute towards imposter syndrome. And it doesn't matter how much degrees or masters or qualifications or doctorates or you still consider yourself to be a member of the out group.
What is the arrow of the out group them brackets? The arrow pointing to education. What is that standing for? What does that mean?
That the out group, they've gone and got the education. So the in group has somehow produced a whole bunch of things that you can learn in order to know what they know and do what they do. So they produce some kind of educational package that you can learn. Even if you're a member of the out group, you can learn it. But the in group will still put a whole bunch of stuff in place to make sure that members of the out group, where possible, never infiltrate. So the out group can get the education, but can't get into the in group because the in group does a whole bunch of stuff to keep the out group out, to keep them out. Does that make a bit of sense?
It makes perfect sense. Thank you.
Good. Anyone else? And by the way, I can't see non-verbals because I only see the screen of whoever it is that lights up. So if you're silent for long, then I'll leave it. I've learned with Zoom, the best way to run Zoom when I'm recording it is to put the images at the top right-hand corner of the screen, because it records every time one of you guys speaks, it puts the pictures of you guys there on the recording, and I can't really get rid of it. I mean, there is a way, but it's cumbersome. Okay, cool, let's crack on. So I want you to hold in mind in-group, out-group. In-group, out-group. So who's most vulnerable? I thought this was interesting and important to look at. People who are perfectionists. Let's go through this one by one. People who are perfectionists. So this doesn't have to be a black-white thing or a man-woman thing or whatever. It could be just that you're somebody who's a perfectionist. And because you're a perfectionist, you constantly feel like you're an imposter because you're a perfectionist. So you keep thinking that you're faking it or you're a fraud because you haven't become perfect yet. And because you haven't become perfect yet, you have anxieties around this or whatever. High achievers, somebody is like, I have to achieve, I have to be perfect, I have to be great, I have to be amazing, and so on and so forth. So the top doctors, top leaders, top, people are extremely vulnerable to this imposter syndrome thing. Underrepresented groups, which I've kind of led with, people that usually people that belong to marginalized groups or underrepresented groups. So it yeah, depending on the context that you're in, it could be if a man in a group of women or a woman in a group of men. It could be a black person in a group of white people, a white person in a group of black people. It could be somebody who's disabled in a group of people who are able-bodied. You can categorize any category of people that you want, but if it's an underrepresented group that has been marginalized for whatever reason, high incidence of imposter syndrome. Major life transition, starting in new areas, new communities. There's probably tons and tons and tons of people on Clubhouse with imposter syndrome who maybe hide in the audience and they don't feel like they should be on stage. And I often hear this on apps like Clubhouse, where I hear people saying, "Oh, I don't go on stage because I don't think I have anything valuable to say." I've heard this so many times from so many people who otherwise would seem as if they're confident, but they believe that they have nothing valuable to say. I don't usually, now and again, I'll correct people and say, well, anything you say will be valuable, but nowadays I'll just leave people to it. If you've been rejected a lot, like what's it called in the field, in the mainstream field of NLP, I've been not rejected in a way that's it hurt at the time, I suppose, but I've been rejected loads and loads and loads in the mainstream field of NLP. And last but not least, people who compare themselves with others. So if you constantly compare yourself with others, like specifically people that are more successful than you, so they might be just like you, but maybe they're more successful than you. And if you constantly compare yourself to them, it might make you feel like you're an imposter. And it's funny because there's well, not funny, but funny like weird. I've met quite a few people who have met me, and because I can speak about NLP in quite an in-depth, comprehensive way, there's quite a few NLP practitioners who have met me because they learned from somewhere else, and then when they're in my presence talking about and we're discussing NLP, they quit referring to themselves as an NLP practitioner, or they quit being a life coach, or they just quit wanting to be anywhere near me because they feel like an imposter when they're around me. Now, I used to think this was weird before, but then when I saw people are literally quitting being an entrepreneur and just going and getting a job because they've been around Darren for a little bit too long, and they're like, oh, I'm comparing myself with you. No, don't want to do this anymore. I quit. I'm like, what the? And I'm like, you know what? That's not my problem. But that's the thing. When you compare yourself with other people, that's long. That will give you a whole bunch of syndromes. Right, I'm gonna stop there. And again, the part by the point of the way, the parts where I say, actually, no, I tell it like there's probably once or twice where I felt anxious at first because I felt like the odd one out. But then I say, fuck this shit. I want to be a part of this. I want to change this. I want to make a difference. I want to take a piece of this industry. I want a place in this industry, and I don't give a shit who tries to stop me. And that's the complete opposite of having imposter syndrome. It's about having imposter confidence. Yeah, 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 yeah.
I like that you said that because I agree with Jasmine. Looking at this list and thinking back on when those feelings of being an imposter come up, I am familiar with those, and I have placed in strategies where the moment I feel the onset of some insecurity about the place, I will tell myself I belong here. I will broaden my chest and elevate my head and quickly say to myself in my power stance and in my confident voice that I belong here. And I just remember that, and that kind of like takes it off because I'm usually the only in the rooms that I go in. And so every time I go into a room as recent as this week, it's not like it doesn't happen. I just know ahead of time to prep myself to say I belong here if I ever feel that I belong here. And it's just walking into that mindset. But Yeah, when you cross over into a lot of the who is most vulnerable, it makes me think about how deeply or ingrained it has been in just hidden things, or just the things in the peripheral that we don't always realize that impacts these little beliefs and fixed mindsets that come on top of us. And
Defo. Dina, have you ever gone into a situation and realized that you are the only something in the room?
multiple times.
Nice one. Could you give an example, something that you're happy to share?
Well, I'll just go with the classic one. I'm half Dutch, half English. So, yeah, I've had it. I've lived in Holland and I've lived in England, and I've had both countries and both languages be a thing because I can speak both languages and a thing. And I've lived in both countries, and you could say it's a nationality thing, but it's more than that. It's like I don't look like a regular English person, probably. No, I definitely don't. I look more Dutch than English, I think. But it is I don't know. But yeah, it's like so you could put its nationality and looks, I guess, but then it's like, yeah, definitely then I feel like an outsider of both in both circumstances of having lived in both countries with both languages.
So when you're in England, people are like, people see you as different because you aren't English, and then when you're in Holland, people see you as different because you're not Dutch.
Yeah, exactly.
God, that must be confusing. And now you're in America. How does that translate for things in America?
Well, I'm totally an outsider in America, but America is I'm going to use the term melting pot of outsiders because it's nationalities and people from all over the world. So then it's like I kind of feel the most at home here because of that, because it's like every group and nationality is here. So
Nice. So you're often a member of the out group.
yeah, I guess so. Yeah, I'm talking about that. Yeah.
Cool. Brilliant, and thank you for sharing. I think these things are really important. This imposter syndrome can happen to anybody. Anybody where you feel like it's a us versus them kind of thing, plus the other things with overachieving, perfectionism kind of stuff, plus the new position stuff. I think this is really important to know. And also, who was that?
I'm sorry, it was Jocelyn.
Oh, go, Jasmine. Sorry, it didn't light up. Go on.
What the other thing that came up for me that's not necessarily on this list is the age thing, because a lot of the rooms that I end up in, I'm the youngest one. And so it can come up around age too for me.
Yeah. So anything where this is why I added that thing. So in the literature, I saw a few things around in group out group, and I just thought I'd just go a little bit into that and create a whole slide around that just to highlight that as a key point. It's the us versus them mentality that will potentially result in a person feeling that they're an imposter and they don't belong, and that they're a fake and fraud and all this sort of stuff. So yeah, thanks for pulling that in 100%. So yes, 100 us versus them. This concept, I think it's important to bring up. I know I've brought this up to I think just Jasmine before, but stereotype threat is a concept that I came across while I was studying social psychology, and I actually did some research around this. But stereotype threat, basically how it works is, right, so I'm just gonna right, you might be aware of a stereotype that people have about you and people like you. So you might be aware of a stereotype that people have about you and people and people like you. If you are aware, if you're strongly aware of a stereotype that people have about you, then as you go around in the world, because you've internalized that stereotype about your about people like you, if anybody outside of you does or says anything that triggers you and reminds you which stereotype you belong to, this then triggers off a form of anxiety. So, for example, if there's a stereotype of young Black men, and I'm strongly aware of it, and I experience stereotype threat, what will happen is all somebody's got to do is say or do something that reminds me that I am a youngish Black man. And then that would make me start thinking, oh my God, you're thinking this, you're thinking that. Oh my God, you're judging me. Oh my God, everybody rare. Oh, you're only behaving like that towards me because I'm a young Black man, which then fills up my working memory and my mind with a whole bunch of stuff, which makes it more harder for me to think. Now, the reason I bring up stereotype threat is because if this happens to you, where your mind goes into a tailspin thinking about what people are thinking about you because of the stereotype stuff, it makes it that your efficiency and sometimes your effectiveness goes down because your brain is so busy thinking about how others are treating you and perceiving you that you're not focused on whatever the task is at hand. I did a study on some people once where I got people in a room and I played them videos of a woman who's a working class kind of poor woman speaking about some subject. And then I got another group of human beings and I put them into a room and I had them watching a video of a very wealthy, powerful corporate executive speaking. The people that were in the room, in the group that were influenced by the poor person did worse on a really basic English and maths test that I gave them than the people who were exposed to the more wealthier, more perceived powerful person. This is one of the effects of stereotype threat and stereotype activation, which is another thing I'm not going into today. But yeah, stereotype threat will happen. Like, so if you're a woman and you are in a group of men, you might think, oh my Lord, I'm the only woman here. Oh God, I need, these men are going to be thinking this. These men are going to be thinking that. These men are going to be doing this. My men. And while your mind is doing all that, you're not thinking about whatever it is you're supposed to be focused on. How can you focus on a presentation or a delivery or a coaching session or whatever when you're so busy thinking about your own stereotype? And you're probably thinking about your stereotype more than they are because you're more aware of the stereotype more than sometimes other people are. Not always, but that's the case. So that's what stereotype threat is. And again, I've done lots of research this and I find it's a fascinating thing. And when I first learned about stereotype threat, this was the thing that released me from being a victim of it. Because if I think to myself, oh my God, did they say that word because I'm Black? That sort of thinking held me to ransom for a couple of decades. And yeah, when I snapped out of that, like, it was no longer a problem. It's important. It's so important. Whichever stereotype you may or may not belong to, it's so important to be aware of the stereotype you belong to and find ways of digging that shit out of your mind. Forgive the swear word, but digging it out of your mind and making it that the moment that you feel yourself accessing those thoughts, you do something to stop it fast. If you don't, your efficiency and your performance will go down in whatever the context is, because it will affect and cloud your judgment because your working memory is being taken up by thoughts of stuff to do with the stereotype, and that might make you more angry, and then no matter what you do come across as the angry Black woman, or if Dina complains more and more and more, she'll come across more and more and more as the Karen. Or if Dr. Katrina speaks more and more and more about anything academic or whatever, then she'll be perceived more as being the thing, the stereotype. So again, stereotype threat is a really dangerous one because it creeps up. I mean, I mean, I don't know much about the stereotypes of America, but from what a little I know, I assume, Jasmine, I hope this doesn't offend you, but I assume that you really like fried chicken.
I actually do, but I don't eat it that often. But it's yeah, but I see what you're saying. That's the thing. Yeah.
Notice what happened. Right, I want everyone to notice what happened the moment I said that. What happened? Be real, be honest. What happened the moment I said that? What did you think straight away?
I just find it funny because I kind of detach from some of those basic things. But yeah, I some people would get really offended about it. Yeah, but I don't. I find it funny.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. When Tiger Woods won the golf tournament and the course with him being the first, there was a lot of jokes about ordering fried chicken at the ceremonial dinner. I know people personally that just will not eat those stereotypical type foods out in public. Even if they eat them behind closed doors, they definitely will not eat them in public. Will not want to be seen around watermelon, will not want to be seen around fried chicken.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, those are the
No,
main two.
exactly. No, I did that on purpose because there's certain trigger words that when these words are said, it automatically triggers certain thoughts in whoever the stereotype, whoever the person is that belongs to that stereotype. So for black people, watermelon, fried chicken, maybe some other stuff. For white people, might be another thing. For women, it could be driving and parking a car, or other things. It's important to be mindful, and this is where, bringing in an NLP and thing. If there are words that are likely to trigger your thought patterns into associative networks that fill your mind with a whole bunch of stuff, if there's words that do that to you, it's important to collapse those anchors and make it that those words are no longer, those words now trigger off something completely different to what they did before. Maybe swish away the effects of certain words, because if you don't handle those sort of trigger words, what's going to happen is somebody's going to say the word fried chicken to you, and what will then happen is you're going to be like, oh my god, you said that because I'm black. Oh my god, is that what's going on? Oh my god, you're racist. Oh my god, is that how you think of it? Is that how you think of me? And the person who said it, they win. They did it on purpose because they knew what it was going to do to you. This is almost like a form of magic, people. Can I just say a word or two words and make it that you crash into a heap of anxious mess just because I said one word? It's funny, the stereotype threat thing, and whatnot. I first learned that it was a thing that somebody would use on you as a thing. Where when I was at so again, I always talk about uni, but I went to university as an adult. So I went to university as an adult. Just because I wanted to change my life around a bit. And when I went to university, there was this guy that I met, and he was from New Zealand. And after basically he made friends with me on purpose with intent because he saw that I was drawing a lot of attention in the campus, and he made friends with me. And one time after a university lecture, we went to a Kentucky Fried Chicken. And I remember him saying stuff like, I wasn't aware of the fried chicken stereotype because the fried chicken stereotype belongs to America and American black people. It's not a thing over here at all. It's just not a thing. That's important to note. This guy, this white gentleman from New Zealand, in his mind, obviously, he believed or thought that the fried chicken stereotype was a thing for all black people everywhere. So this New Zealand guy, he was like, Darren, so you like a bit of fried chicken, do you? And I was like, yeah, I think KFC is fucking amazing. And, we went to KFC, we ate food. And then the next time we went to KFC, he was like, oh, you really like your fried chicken, don't you? And I was just like, why does he keep talking about my love for KFC? What is wrong with this guy? KFC's got its secret herbs and spices. They've got amazing fries. You can buy the chicken burgers or the fried chicken drumsticks. I love it. I love KFC. And every time we went to KFC, he kept talking about fried chicken. And then I remember once we weren't anywhere near KFC. We was at university, and he kept saying to me, fried chicken, fried chicken, fried chicken. And I was like, why does this guy keep saying fried chicken? I didn't understand it. Until one day, I watched some kind of video, something to do with some, it was like some kind of American parody or joke thing. And I learned that in America, there's a lot of people that get offended when you say fried chicken to them, black people. And that's when I realized, I was like, oh, he's been trying to offend me. Oh, and I'm supposed to act in a certain way. There's like a supposed behavior that I'm meant to have around that. Oh, so I was lucky. I was inoculated from that because I was protected from the stereotype because the stereotype wasn't relevant to me. But the stereotype that he had in his mind, this New Zealand guy had in his mind, he tried to attribute it to me to make me feel nervous or anxious at university, which is quite evil when you think about it too much. But yeah, stereotype through it. There's factors that work against you. Let's keep it real. There's factors that work against you. In-group favoritism. So the in-group, the group that you want to become a part of, they've got in-group favoritism for each other. And it is what it is. And underneath, there's a couple of NLP techniques that can be used to make, to force people to challenge their own shit. Neural mechanisms of in-group favoritism. So things like racism, unconscious biases, stuff like that. There's a bunch of things that we found on a neurological level that are just automatic. Like, I remember there's a study that I read once. I can't remember all of the details, but the main part is there was a study done where white Caucasian people were put into an fMRI machine to scan their brain. And when they were given a black face to look at, there was a different effect on their brain to if they had a white face to look at. But part of the study was when they were looking at a black face under the fMRI imagery machine, when they were looking at a black face and rap music was playing, that triggered off anxiety. Because of blackface plus the stereotypical music associated with, and then whiteface with classical music or something like that. And then they swapped it over and they were able to find an effect of the fear center of the brain is triggered when people look at a black face. So fear is triggered when you look at a black face. And if there's a whole bunch of stuff in the context that surrounds it to add to the fear, then that triggers off the fear part of the brain, the amygdala, right in the middle of the brain. I thought that was really fascinating. I was just like, shit. And that made me think about maybe like police in America. I think police in America, there's a fear thing that's immediately triggered when they see certain types of people. And then that triggers off maybe a quicker trigger finger, who knows, that's a thing. So that's an important thing. Sometimes when everybody in the group is the same in some way, and you're not in some visible, obvious way, then group homogeneity, group sameness kicks in, and it means that they are mean towards you, and then you start developing imposter syndrome, so on and so forth. Out-group derogation, this is where the in-group are horrible to you, mean to you, and attack you because you're considered as them. It's like us versus them. And last but not least, social influence. There's certain things, certain conditions, and there's loads and loads of studies that have been done, mainly in the 50s, fresh after World War II, going forward. There's lots and lots of studies that have been done about social influence and how people in a group influence each other to make sure that the out-group stays being the out-group, and then they never come into the in-group. So these are all factors that work against you. And again, underneath all of these, there's NLP techniques that can be used to change these things, even if they're a strong thing in a group, in a community.